Right, second part of the class, Poppies. I'm going to be annotating the poem now in a little bit more detail. I know I asked you to start annotating with what you found. I'm going to give you some ideas of what to look for as well, and then I'm going to give you obviously the full annotation. There's always more. You'll be able to add to it. There will always be more, and your own interpretation might be different to mine as well. What would a son say about war? What do you think? Would they be worried? Would they be fearful? Would they say it's monstrous? Would they say it's tough? Would they talk about blood? Would they be proud, do you think? And it's interesting to think about that because this maybe is what the narrator thought about her son going away to war. And what would the mother say about war? Would they be anxious? Would they be proud too? Would they be worried? Would they be fearful? Would they be angry? Would they be hopeful? And I think that you can see that we have a semantic field of all of these themes here in the poem that we have just read. Let's see what the poet says.
Hello, my name's Jane Weir and we're in my studio in Derbyshire. Today we're going to talk about my war poem Poppies, and then we're going to go outside and walk in the landscape in which the poem is located in. So we've come out of the studio now and we're in Holy's Park, which is really where the poem began. We're in St Giles's churchyard in Matlock, and we're just about to go up to Pictou where the War Memorial is. This is a place I came up quite a lot with my youngest son. Every day we'd walk out from home or sometimes from the studio and we'd walk up through the park, up to St Giles's churchyard, and we'd walk the long winding path which leads up to the War Memorial. I think people often think that graveyards are sort of very scary places, but both me and my youngest son, James, found this place a kind of playground, sort of a way of escaping. Lots of sort of beautiful things in the graveyard, the stones and the masonry work on the church and the inscriptions on the graves. And though it might seem a little bit bizarre, it's a place of kind of escape and fantasy. I think wandering through the graveyard and sort of wandering through the stones, you notice graves which were both 19th century, 18th century, earlier than that, 15th century. But then you start noticing dotted all over like toadstools, these white puffy stones, small and squat in the grassy mounds. And you go a bit closer and certainly we're drawn to them almost. And you notice that these aren't people who are dead from a long time ago. These are people who died in wars, the First World War and the Second World War. And it's very poignant. So I think it was this constant repetition, because it was a sort of daily thing we used to do, come up here, seeing the gravestones, especially of the war dead, that made me think about, the idea of losing a child and what that must feel like. A lot of the graves were of young men, soldiers and airmen. Some were only as young as 18 years old, And as a mother, I kind of tried to almost put myself, if you can at all, into the position of people that may have lost either husbands, lovers, children. So we've reached the top of the hill, and this is the War Memorial that commemorates the dead, the men and women who served and who fought in the First World War and the Second World War. Also includes somebody from Northern Ireland, which I think's a step forward. And this is the War Memorial, which I describe in the poem as leaning against like a wishbone, which is really what I thought the mother, the character in the poem, did. And over there, you can only just about hear it now, is the ghostly sound of children's voices in the playground. So Poppies is really a poem of remembrance. It's remembering the dead, is remembering not just them dead, but as alive and as active as the boy is in the poem. And it's falling really fine, the mist now, and the leaves are all burnished and golden. And sometimes when the breeze falls, they just shower the ground. Not like poppies, but like lost souls, really. It just, I think this time of year reminds you of the people who were here, not just long ago, but people who are fighting now in wars and who are also dying. And I think it's important for each generation really to remember that. I'm a designer, and when I was writing this poem, I was trying to think of ways of actually using metaphors from my own textile practices. And grief's a really difficult emotion to capture in a way that doesn't sound cheesy or completely sentimental or even false. And I tend to think about emotion through thread and through cloth and weave and pattern even. And then I was looking at a piece of felt that a friend of mine had brought in, and I started to think about the process of felt making. And I thought it was a good way of explaining the way grief compacts upon itself. If you think about felt making, you think about the layers, the way they overlap with each other and then almost melt into a kind of solidity and form a kind of barrier, a sort of muffling barrier to pain or to anything that tries to penetrate it. I thought that would be a really interesting way of actually talking about pain and in a way about loss and what we actually do with loss and where it goes in the body. And the line, all my words rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting, is really a way of trying to convey what happens to emotion when it enters the body. And Emily Dickinson, the great American poet, talked about grief. She talked about after great pain, a formal feeling comes. It seems so true. So we just walked up from the War Memorial and we're up at High Tor, Poppies. 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. Before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. Sellotape bandaged around my hand. I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could, smoothed down your shirt's upturned collar, still the softening of my face. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. I was brave as I walked with you to the front door. Through it opened the world overflowing like a treasure chest. A split second and you were away, intoxicated. After you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this is where it led me, skirting the churchyard walls, my stomach busy making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless without a winter coat or reinforcement of scarf, gloves. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscriptions on the war memorial, leaned against it like a wishbone. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind.
Okay, so that's what the poet has to say. I think it's always really important to have a look at context. Okay, let's analyze this poem and get it annotated, shall we? Okay, so let's have a look at the first stanza. So the theme of remembrance here is established in the first line of the poem using kind of a temporal shift here. Now, I want you to have a look at all of these questions here and see if you can answer. These are just kind of ideas just to start to prick your mind in terms of thinking about how you should interpret this poem and how you do interpret this poem, not should. There's not always the one answer. So if you pause it here and then we'll go through some suggested answers, analysis of these ideas here. Okay, so what do the poppies symbolize? Well, the poppy has symbolic links to violence, death, and memory, and it is quite foreboding here, placed in this first stanza in this poem. Now, why individual war graves? What is the effect? This highlights the individual personal nature of war, which is a theme throughout. And then paired with the mother pining for him and putting a poppy onto her son's blazer, this serves to highlight his personal and intimate nature and the closeness of the speaker and the subject. And here we've got the significance of using the pronouns I and you. It brings that very personal and intimate nature. The blockade here, it's a military reference to blocking, and perhaps here it's significant in terms of blocking of emotion. We've also got alliteration to show the mothering nature that she has with her son. And the term blazer also reminds us of a school uniform, as if the speaker still sees her son as a child. So there we go. Let's have a look at stanza 2 now. Again, if you could have a look at some of these questions which are designed again to kind of prick your mind into an interpretation, and then I'll go through it. So pause. Okay, so where would you normally see a bandage? What does this link to? And how might it link to her emotions? Well, here we have a familiar noun and then a military metaphor. The reference to sellotape is quite a familiar, normal image, and a homely image as well. But bandaged can be used to imply wounds or injury here, really, and harm as well. So what is the effect of repeating the S sound? And this is sibilance. The words steeled, shirt, softening, they give a really calm tone to the scene described in the poem. And how did she treat him? Oh, here, I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose. This aside gives us a very personal anecdote here and creates a sense of intimacy and human realism in the speaker's voice. And this is juxtaposed here with the military side of her son. And what is the effect of this metaphor in terms of the black thorns of her hair? The black thorns is a reference to the shortened hair stubble which is required in the military and how aggressive it makes her son's appearance to be to her. But she still has this impulse, this motherly impulse to run her hands through his hair. And we've got a list of 3. What's the effect of it? So it's the power of 3 here. It reflects the way the mother is tongue-tied and doesn't know what to say. She is proud of her son, but doesn't want him to go. Let's have a look at stanza 3. So again, have a look at the ideas, the questions, and pause, please. Okay, so how did she act? Is there anything to suggest how she was feeling deep down? So the melting here, and we've got enjambment as well. I must note as well, we've got enjambment here. to show that her thoughts are continual, right? The melting seems to be referring to the melting of the narrator's heart, and it's an idiom that describes a person's emotions overflowing and becoming really overwhelming. And what is the effect of the mention of time in this way? The front door here conveys both literal and metaphorical meanings. Metaphorically, it acts as a threshold between the world of domestic living, the boy's experience, and the battlefields of the future. And all of the memories the narrator has of her son become separated from his present day being by the door. And she was brave here as well. Really, we do question that as well. And in terms of the simile, what does it suggest her son felt here? Like a treasure chest, it relates to the emotions of both the man and his mother as he leaves the adventure and glory that treasure connotes here. This kind of, he's perhaps excited, thinking this is going to be glorified, this is going to be finding treasure, becoming a man kind of idea. This kind of shows his naive perception of this newfound freedom and childlike perception, perhaps. And for the speaker, the overflowing signifies her inability to control her emotions anymore as he leaves. And why might the son be like the songbird? I'm not sure what you thought about the songbird there, but the release of a songbird is a metaphor that relates to the newfound freedom of the man, and the cage may signify oppression and sort of the normality, day-to-day life. But it may also show that the mother has released her emotions in his bedroom. So she's literally crying. And obviously we've got another allusion here. The dove being the symbol for peace is really foreshadowing here. And the dove leads her to a church, and we're not clear if it's actually led her to the grave of her son, but it makes her stomach uncomfortable and in a very much a state of unease. And we can feel a good level of sympathy with her here. And she refers to her textile making here as well. Perhaps it's her trying to tidy up the place, perhaps making tucks, darts, pleats. Okay. And in the final stanza, we've got the hill, and this objectifies the emotional challenge that she has had to overcome, and she's now at the top. But it also represents how she could be at the pinnacle of this distress that she is clearly going through. And then in terms of the wishbone, I know Jane in the video, she did talk about the representation of the wishbone. It's designed to give good luck, which contrasts the tragic foreshadowing of the previous stanza, but it's also terribly fragile, the wishbone. Perhaps that is how she is portraying the speaker here. And then the dove flies away. Is it flying away from the hope and the peace that it personifies? Or is it representing her son who wanted to be free in this childlike perception? Whatever you believe, this is absolutely tragic for the narrator. We've got the nostalgic tone returning in the final two lines, as the narrator longs to hear her son's voice again, and this longing and the fact that she hears nothing cement the belief in us that her son may actually have died. And we have a caesura here, which again, as I've talked about before, it's a pause in a line using punctuation. And this kind of is implying the choking back of the tears here. Okay, so let's have a look at the structure of this poem. It's written as a dramatic monologue with 4 stanzas, no rhyme scheme, but we do have a lot of enjambment here. which is very significant. The stanzas are structured along the events in the life of mother and child, and it kind of flits back in a stream of consciousness as well. So the first stanza, the mother looks back at Remembrance Day and the idea of the poppy, which has helped trigger the memory. Second, the mother talks about helping her son get ready and seeing him off. Third, the poem explores the emptiness that's left in his absence. Fourth, finally, the mother feels drawn to a war memorial, bringing the story back to where it started, yet now with no son around, and the suggestion of the dove being that he has died. And again, the poem uses a lot of enjambment and familiar nouns to enhance the idea of this natural tone and the mother's voice and the mother's pain. Okay, this reinforces the pain and the loss and this inner conflict. So from talking about the structure, it goes quite nicely onto kind of the themes that we have, which the poem looks partially at conflict, as I've just mentioned, because of the nature of the son going to war. But it's so much more than that. It's so much more from the perspective of those it leaves behind. So it's the personal conflict of those that it leaves behind. So we've seen the conflict in terms of remains. We've seen the conflict in terms of war photographer as well, on these people who are in it. But what about the people who are not in it, who are left behind, who are the remains of people's lives? And so this shows this very personal conflict. And you've got the personal pronouns, you've got the use of I, you've got the fragility of imagery there, you've got this enjambment, which is spilling emotions. All of these techniques are showing this theme of this personal conflict, of the reality of war. It is a behind the scenes view of conflict. Okay, thank you.